Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? Navigating our way through the job market can be challenging and even ominous to deal with. In some cases, candidates can be placed easily, and in others, candidates have gone through one rejection after another with no hope in sight. This can be very well be the case for neurodivergent talent, despite their education or experience. To talk about the current job market and to give some helpful insight, I'm joined by Fran Moisa. Fran Moisa is the founder of FM Search, a boutique recruitment, headhunting, and talent advisory firm with over 12 years experience in headhunting in London and Malta. Fran has successfully assisted international businesses ranging from startups to listed companies with the recruitment and retention of employees in highly competitive markets. Outside work, Fran enjoys spending time with her family, participating in various volunteer and charity initiatives, and writing. Welcome, Fran.
Joseph, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited and honored to join you today. And thank you for the very kind introduction. Hopefully we'll have a fruitful discussion that your listeners will find useful.
Well, we're absolutely excited to have you here and to get into understanding the job market as well as recruitment. I want to start with a little bit more about how you got started in recruitment and some of the clients you work with.
Well, I started in recruitment probably like a lot of headhunters and recruiters do by accident. So I was working in London, and at the time, the firm that I was working with, they were going through the recruitment process. I started to assist a little bit. The owner had to go abroad for a period of time. He said, Fran, this is the recruitment you need to deal with, update me when I'm back. And the rest is history, as they say. So I've been within recruitment for, well, actually more than 12 years, but I like to say just over 12 years. So, don't sound too old. um, and I've worked within different industry. I've worked within the real estate industry. I work within the healthcare industry. But for the past 10 years or so, I focused exclusively on the professional services industry. So my clients tend to be quite varied, financial services, regulated firms, iGaming, fintech, now digital assets, with the way that the market is developing. I work with pharmaceuticals, small firms, family firms, large firms, listed firms. So quite a broad spectrum. I've covered. So, all markets are different in some respect in the terms of the dynamics and skills and recruitment processes, but the common denominator is people at the end of the day, within those businesses, and the let's say the predisposition and or inclination towards particular types of sectors, jobs, and types of businesses as well. Made a lot of mistakes in my career that I've learned from, learned from people around me. So recruitment in general is quite an ever evolving subject, because as people we change, we learn from our mistakes, and we adapt to circumstances as well.
Well, you've had a very tremendous career in recruitment, and you've worked with a wide variety of industries from large to small. So you have a very wealth of knowledge and experience. And with that wealth and knowledge, let's go into, as we all know, we have seen tremendous change in the employment in the last 4 years. When we look at the job market prior to the pandemic and to today, how have things changed from within companies to candidates?
I think that's a very pertinent observation. The market, in my opinion, was changing even before the pandemic. But what happened during the pandemic is that it brought it into the open and into the mainstream. And what do I mean by that? So if we talk about the economic cycle, we have the boom periods and we have the downturn periods. Now, during boom periods, usually it is an employee-driven market, which means that there are more people, there are more jobs than skilled individuals to take on those jobs. So it's very intense competition between businesses for talent. And during those times, what you see is an uplift in employer propositions. Now, whether that takes form of salary or perks or very fast promotions, it really depends on the strategy and the resources that each firm has. And during downturn period, you have the reverse. You have less jobs, but more people looking for work. And then the reverse happened. The perks start to come down. Okay, the benefits start to come down. A lot of the times for economic reasons. But this sort of shift, and balance, it really dictates the dynamics of how the market looks like for employees then. And what tends to happen is that, when we have a wealth of opportunities, we become more selective. Now, that happens whether you're a business or an employee looking. But it's important how you become selective about those. So there will always be the case that when making these selections, we perhaps don't treat people or businesses in the right way, and vice versa. And when the reverse happens, it happens a bit like, well, now it's payback time. Remember when I was looking for a job and you didn't even reply to me? Well, now it's my turn, and vice versa, which is the wrong way to go about it, but nevertheless a reality of the day. So what happened during the pandemic is we had the combination of the two, okay, which never happened before. So there were firms that were flourishing and needed skilled individuals, and they had more openings than people in the market. But then there were firms that were highly affected, and it was the reverse. Okay, they had to reduce the headcount. But one common factor that transpired is that we had more time to think. Okay, so when you're going to the office every day, seeing your colleagues, you have a chat around, cup of tea, coffee, or whatever you fancy. You don't have that much time to think, okay, because you're in that motion. You go to work, you do your work, you come home. Now, when you're at home, the dynamic is different. The environment is different. So you can start hearing your thoughts again. And you see the job for the job. Okay, because you no longer have the distractions around you. You no longer have your colleagues that make you laugh. You no longer have your colleagues that can make your day easier, well, or harder, depending on the situation. The point is, you see the job for what it is in its entirety. Okay. So with that, we saw the Great Resignation, didn't we? For whether it was because people were finding, companies that aligned more with what they found of value, or individuals taking the plunge into consultancy, setting up their own business, building up their client book. So the main difference, in my opinion, from what I have observed in the market, not only in Malta, but abroad as well, is that, during the pandemic, people evaluated a lot more closely the value that their jobs have for them. And I don't mean just monetary value, satisfaction, quality of the work, how much you actually enjoy the work that you're doing as well. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And it's interesting in two aspects. The first aspect is prior to the pandemic, there was a start for the shift. And I think argumentally that shift started to come with the millennials and the Zoomers. You started to hear a lot of gripe from employers about not understanding this new generation. And I think, the new generation was seeing how their parents have worked and even how their grandparents have worked, and said, this is not for me. There has to be a better way for having a better work environment. Hence why I think there was a myth of they didn't want to work. I think it was more of, I want to have the better conditions to work in. And if you're going to have higher expectations, then I'm also going to have higher expectations for what I want, for the lifestyle that I want to have in work and outside of work. I think the second aspect is definitely, it's interesting you said that during the pandemic or even after the pandemic, you saw a combination of both. That's interesting. I think it depends on the sector, to be perfectly honest. It definitely depends on, because, for example, I just just yesterday or the day before, actually, I just finished doing a training for managers in the UK, and you have two or three of the managers in there who are in desperate need in the engineering factor industry or in the manufacturing aspect, where they're in desperate need. There's not enough talent. They're trying to recruit talent. So I think again, it depends on the industry where both of those things are happening. I think the other aspect is definitely a lot of people did evaluation, and I like the comment you did that you stated that seeing the job for the job. And again, this is where you kind of gets it's a question for later, but if I recall correctly, but where you have this quiet quitting and going back to what was even happening prior to the pandemic, where it is if this is if this is what the job is and this is how I'm going to be treated, then I expect more. And if I'm not going to get more and I'm not going to be treated appropriately, then I'm going to leave to go to an other job, another tribe that will treat me and meet my needs and standards.
There's a lot to unpack there. I'll start with the easiest part in terms, like you said, it very much depends on the sector, and it is true. Some certain areas of expertise and sectors have been more affected than others. But at the same time, with a caveat is that, we are in a globalized economy. So, whereas the domino effect has not been as strong as we would have, as we have seen in the financial crisis during 2008, we are starting though now to see some effects. Again, not to the extent of the 2008, 2009 nightmare. I think that's the appropriate term for what happened then. But it is nevertheless a ripple effect. And I think it's very important that we recognize this. I am a very big advocate, if you will, for a better word, of pragmatism and reality. And it's very important that we balance, internal dialogue with external realities. Like so, we can make better decisions and we can be more realistic with regards to our expectations. Then coming to your second point, seeing the job for what it is, that's where your internal dialogue is very important. Are you in the right career? Are you fit for that career? Are your skills sufficient for that career? And these are very hard questions to ask, because a lot of the times we tend to focus on the external. So what's happening to me? Okay. And it's very important that we balance that with the value that we put in as well. Okay. Otherwise, we're going to go in loops. Like you said, we're going to go from one business to the other, or a business is going to go from one employee to the other. It's valid both ways. Okay. So it's important that critical evaluation exists. And I cannot stress this enough. It's very important that one takes stock of what it is and the situation as it is, and the value that it generates, because it takes two to tango at the end of the day, not just one. With regards to quiet quitting, like I said, we're going to get into that later, but yes, like you said, if something doesn't work, it's important to understand why it doesn't work, whether you're a business or an employee. See what your part is in the not working bit. Take steps to see if that can be rectified, and then make a decision. Now, if that decision leads with you leaving, or the business finding someone else, that's absolutely fine. But I think it's important to go through that process, because it will help you not make the same mistakes, but it will also create the opportunity for dialogue between parties.
That's very, very sound advice and a very good perspective. I agree with you in regards to what is the reality of the situation, and definitely the internal dialogue. I mean, yes, if you're not going to, if a company's not going to necessarily meet your standards, then you also have to be realistic about what your standards are, and try to find a midpoint. Otherwise, again, through that self-evaluation, if that midpoint can't be found, then you have to look elsewhere. And this definitely brings up into the next question. But before I get to that, I'm seeing from from the conversations that I'm having with clients and with people that I'm coaching is that a lot of people are leaving with no prospects because of not necessarily either A, because of the standards, or B, which is more of the cases of how they're treated at work. So when we look back at the market, there has always been these kinds of issues, and they may have been ignored or not dealt with. But since the pandemic, a vast light has been shined onto these particular problems. And it's kind of funny where mental health was not always looked upon in
Professional setting.
a professional setting, but since the pandemic, it has been. But still, there's still these concerns. And going back, I'm seeing a lot of people leaving because of how they're being treated at work with a boss mentality rather than a leadership mentality. So, what have you been seeing as being the problematic with recruitment practices in this regards?
You are right. I mean, I think even the other day I saw an article online, that individuals, quit without having necessarily another job aligned. I mean, this can be a combination of factors, but I would say that the primary factor of that is that having the comfort of knowing that jobs are out there as well. Again, I don't believe it's wise to ignore realities, and we are in a candidate driven market. But if it was, if we were to turn back the clock to 2008, that wouldn't have happened. Okay, because it would be unwise to do so. So there is a combination of things that factors, never in isolation. Now, why are people doing that? I think a lot of the time, more often than not, is for very, very valid reasons. Now, those reasons can be the environment that does not work with the individual's personality and how they want to work. And at other times, it could be the job in itself. I've seen a lot of people going through career changes, shifts, some more dramatic than others. When I say more dramatic, a complete, change of, job in, someone is an economist and they're becoming an artist, for example. Okay, so complete shifts, or smaller changes, perhaps sticking with the same example from an economist, you're going to a perhaps let's say business advisor, so still within the same sphere, but different dynamics. So when you mentioned the boss mentality and everything, again, this is a matter of perspective as well. Some people work very well with that sort of environment, others don't. So again, this becomes a matter of perspective and what works for you and what doesn't. Okay, now can we do things better? Yes. Can we improve them? Yes. But sometimes, and I've seen this, it's not a style, that works for me, but it's a style that can work for some people. Like, again, I revert to your example, listen, you have to do this, that, and the other, and that's it. Some people work very well like that. I don't think it's a very high number, but they're part of the equation as well. So again, it's about the internal dialogue, what works for you and what doesn't. And when it comes to recruitment practices, it's very important that these sorts of things are taken into consideration during the recruitment process or pre-onboarding. So the way that we conduct interviews is very important, but also the way that candidates approach interviews is very important. Okay, it's we have moved along with a lot of things, like you said, being more open about mental health, being more open about what adds value to people within the workplace, and vice versa. But we haven't changed the way we're interviewing very much, unfortunately. And until we look at that, we're going to have the same discussion in 3 years' time again. So for me, interviews are an opportunity to discover the person next to you. I think if everyone would approach interviews with a curiosity mindset, it would change a lot the dynamics. See the person behind the desk, as it were. now whether they are actually behind the desk or not, it doesn't matter, but you see where I'm going with this. And look to understand their motivations, and have an honest discussion about it, because lack of honesty exists on both sides. Or maybe not necessarily, because again, in my experience, I'm yet to see people that conduct interviews outright lying. It is how they perceive the situation. But presenting pros and cons, and understanding your limitations is very important, and this goes for both parties. Because as companies may say, yeah, we're going to train you, we're going to do this, that, and the other. You go in there and it's not like that. But the reverse exists as well, where can say, yes, I'm very good with this, yes, I understand this, I can do that, I can do the other. When you actually go and do it, you don't know how to do it, or you don't know how to do it very well. So this gap exists on both sides. And again, it is important that we look within ourselves and we understand the contribution we're having to that. We can't expect the other person, now whether the other person is the business, the interviewer, or the candidate, for them to do all the extra mileage and we just sit there waiting. And that goes on, both sides. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you have, but it's opened up
A can of worms.
a can of worms. It's definitely opened
Yeah.
up a can of worms. Definitely coming from a neurodiversity perspective, and even just the whole concept of recruitment in general. I mean, first off, let's tackle here. You mentioned, does the boss environment, some people work well in that. Yes, I would concede that there is a percentage that work well with that. But to answer your question, uh, based on the latest Gallup Reid study in regards to employee engagement, which just came out last year, and they do it every 2 to 3 years around the world about measuring engagement. It's only up at 19%, and it's actually gone up in consideration to the previous study, but the numbers are greater in North America, where they've made a lot of changes, than it is in Europe, according to the study. Now, the overall effect in that regards, though, is that the boss mentality is not the favorable factor when it comes to work environments. It
Yes, yes.
is proper leadership, proper communication, and motivation in the workplace that is pushing the level for better work environments. So if you have a boss and a leader, it's the leader that has excels. It's the leader that has high turnover. Sorry, less turnover and
Less turnover, yes, yes.
and greater productivity. And it's the boss that has less productivity and more turnover.
Yep, absolutely.
So now you mentioned our previous part of the conversation about doing a self-evaluation. Do you have the skills? Do you have the job? Can you work in that environment? I think that is a valid point. And what I would say is, I think a lot of individuals, but in particular in this conversation, neurodiverse talent has the skills, but they're not being recognized for the skills. They're being more recognized for their challenges, and it's an issue of whether the employer, the manager, has the skill set to engage properly, be a leader rather than be a boss. Are they treating their employees as people and thinking about the user experience? Or are they treating them as commodities, whether they use and throw out the next day? And then the interview section, that's where the can of worms really comes into play. There's a number of factors there. I mean, let's start off with the job advert. The job advert, if it's not written properly, and a lot of job adverts are not written properly, where they don't focus on the essential skills, where they're using lingo that has double meaning or doesn't relate to the job, or they're adding a lot of fluff that interferes with the job, like team player, communication skills, leadership skills, natural learner. I mean, these words, don't, it depends on the situation. You may have someone, a natural learner, and that's an interesting one, because you may learn something in 30 days, but I may learn something in 60 days. Now, 60 days for me is natural for me. So does that mean I'm not a natural learner by your standards? And communication, I communicate differently, but I can communicate. So what does communication skills mean? And so when it comes to the job advert, if it's not written in clean, simple, precise language, and you're very clear about what you're looking for, that's the other thing too. I think a lot of job adverts have more wants than what there is the actual skill set for what the job is. A lot of talent may look at it and not apply, saying, even though they check the boxes for what they're looking for based on the job advert, they're going to say, this is the job for me. So that brings into question, are you getting people who come to the interview, or are you calling up people who come to the interview who are basically confident, or versus someone who didn't feel confident applying to begin with? And then when you take a look at the job interview, there's a lot of things there. I mean, is it a structured job interview? Are they asking just surface questions, or are they asking in-depth questions? Is there conscious and unconscious biases in play? Is there confirmation bias in play? Are they looking for cultural fit, or are they thinking about cultural add? Cultural add. Have you heard of the term cultural add?
No.
Cultural add is a counter to cultural fits. It's basically you're looking outside of the type of usual person that you would hire. Yes, do they meet your values? Yes, would they potentially be a good fit for the company? Yes, can they do the job? But at the same time, they're adding a different perspective, a different mindset that's outside of what you would usually hire. So you usually hire prototype A, and you're looking for potentially someone who's prototype B, someone who would challenge and question you, but still do the job. Are they looking for that in the interview? And then the other aspect is, are they just basing their judgment on the conversation or on the CV? Or are they actually testing the people to see if they actually can do the skills that are required for the job? And that's the other aspect. Are they asking questions that's based on the essentials of that job? And that's where the challenge, I think, in those kind of worms as well about the job, the interview process, where it needs to be perfected. Hey, listeners, I want to share with you not one, but two workshops that I've put together to bring awareness and to up-level the skills of employers and managers in human resources. The first workshop aids in building more inclusive environments in the workplace for neurodivergent talent and in developing the skills of management to be more engaging with their teams. I geared the second workshop towards examining and providing practical solutions and how to be more inclusive to neurodivergent talent in the recruitment process. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about this amazing program.
Again, a lot to unpack. So I'll start with the study that you've mentioned, and I agree with you. Like I said, for the boss mentality works for a very small number of people. I can't say, a large number. And definitely leading with empathy and with the desire to work together. I think this is what it boils down to, is that we work together towards a common goal. And it's important that that goal is aligned, then those companies absolutely do better. But again, not always the case. Again, there are many factors at play, okay, here. So it's important, again, I'm as you can see, probably, I'm a very big fan of balance and putting things into balance. There is never, one thing will change everything. There's all small little things that contribute towards creating a better environment and process. So if we're talking about then the recruitment process, starting with job advertising, for example. So there are two elements to it. One of them is important to make the distinction, and this comes from me as a headhunter, because as a headhunter, the job is very different to that of an HR. A lot of people confuse it, but they are essentially very, very different. So a job advertisement need to attract people, to grab their attention, okay, to look at it. You're not going to grab people's attention by putting 12 bullet points, is it? And you're not going to attract people's attention by only talking about you. Okay, so we want, I need, so it's important with job adverts as much as possible, to give a bit of a flavor of what they would gain out of it. How would that make their life better? How would it improve their either professional situation or personal situation, depending on, the type of jobs that you are recruiting for. So it's important that, job adverts, in order to attract talent, actually are written to attract talent rather than to tell talent what you want. So that's number one. Then how job adverts are written, and this is very, very interesting point, and there is a very big learning curve to be had here. Um, one of the mentors that I use for for copywriting and training, they shared a program where you upload your job adverts to see whether they use either more masculine or feminine language. And I found that incredibly interesting. It's not something that I've even ever considered in my mind. But I was pleasantly surprised that most of my adverts were neutral. So that was a good thing. But then, when I was describing, for example, when we used words like competitive, it was more male dominated. And I think there's that's wrong. It's not like women cannot be competitive, you know. Um, or depending on, what type of gender you identify of as, it doesn't mean that, those words are exclusively reserved for, the other side. And I found that really interesting. And I think there's a lot of education to be had there, but there is also a lot of education that we need to do ourselves and say, okay, they use that language. And a lot of the times people don't even realize that by using that language, it is not inclusive. So I think it's important that, we adopt the discussion or the application with the view of, again, critical thinking. Am I right for the job? Okay, then let's talk with them and see what they're about. Because a lot of the time, when you were talking about unconscious bias, of course it exists, even conscious bias, unconscious bias, of course it exists. Absolutely, absolutely. We as humans, we form thinking patterns based on our experience and interactions. The more that we are exposed to a certain category of people and events, the stronger our bias is. Okay, because this is how we learn. We learn by repetitive behavior and by recognizing situations that we have been in before. So when something different to what we have been used to comes along, the first reaction is defensive. Okay, this goes back to our DNA. Okay, that something unknown happened. Oh no, we're going to die. We need to protect ourselves from this. That has still stayed. And a very interesting fact, I'm going to share this, just to make the conversation a bit lighter. Hiccups. Okay, we hiccup, drink some water, try to scare ourselves to make them stop. And I saw a video the other day saying that if you tear this, apparently is a leftover evolutionary trait. And apparently, if you tell your brain, I'm not a fish, you stop hiccuping. I've tried it, bloody works. Now, I don't know whether that was because I actually believe it was some placebo effect or anything like that, but it worked. So what I'm getting with that is that we have certain habits that we have developed. And, as long as we work together to recognize those habits and welcome each other's opinion without judgment, we are going to be in a much better place. Because we have developed as a society the tendency to judge very quickly, very rapidly, and we have lost the art of debate and discussion. And that is such a shame, such a shame. We have to be able to challenge, to discuss with the idea to learn like we used to, rather than point fingers. This cancel culture, for example, and calling people out on social media. I mean, it's really something that I do not agree with at all. I think it's more destructive than it is constructive.
Absolutely. That last point I totally agree with. To a certain extent, there needs to be a degree where you have to have that discussion and call people out, but you have to call them out for the right reasons rather than I think that's more of the cancel culture is more of it kind of relates to more of a confirmation bias in the sense of that this is what I believe and so I'm right, you're wrong, and
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
why you
yeah,
should be
yeah.
canceled.
Yes, 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 exactly, exactly. There's a certain way of doing things that is more constructive rather than destructive. I'm not saying not to have discussions,
Mm.
not to tell people when something is bothering you. I mean, of course not. But it's how we approach that, and this is something that everyone can work with. And when it comes to interviews, like you were saying, how those are conducted, and um I want to pick up on a particular point you've made with regards to neurodiversity. And like you said, in general, we are very well aware of the skills we have and the ones we don't, and we're very honest and upfront about it. And this is where the problem happens in interview. People want to hear what they would like to hear. So when someone honest comes across and tells you, look, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at that, instead of focusing on the good and the skill set, like you said, you're focusing on, oh, but they said they're not good at that. And the other person said they're good at all of this. How realistic is that assessment? Let's be honest. Yeah. So here is a question for interviewers and businesses. Embrace honesty and differences, especially when they are presented real, because when you can work with, it's what you don't know that is hard to work with.
I agree with you 100% on that. The aspect in that regards though is that there's just a complete and utter lack of training and understanding and empathy. So I'll give you an example. I was coaching someone who's been having a hard time finding work. And one of the things I do coach is that you need to become an advocate for yourself, and you need to be upfront and honest. And yes, there might be consequences to this, but this comes down to an issue of whether or not the workplace is safe, which happens to be, ironically, the next question. But before we get into that, she disclosed to where they're looking for English only for the call center, and she disclosed up front that she's dyslexic. And the recruiter said, "Oh, what's that? I've never had anybody tell me that before." And then she, as she's processing and saying it, she goes, "Oh, you mean like reading difficulties?" And of course she replies, "Well, reading difficulties, that's at the tip of the iceberg, but there's various levels of dyslexia. I'm not at that level. I'm at a completely different other level," she said. And she said, "Okay, well, I wouldn't worry about it because this would be more speaking than reading, and there's less reading, so it shouldn't be an issue." And right there, just from that opening commented, is that one, again, there's a lack of training, there's a lack of understanding. At that point, the interviewer should have said, "Okay, well, what is dyslexia and how does it affect you?" And that kind of conversation never came out. It puts neurodiverse talent in a very particular place where, is this the type of environment that I want to work for, or is it a safe place for me to work
Mm-hmm.
for? Is
Mm-hmm.
it safe
Mm-hmm.
for me to disclose?
Very, very interesting example indeed. Very, very, very interesting, I must say. I mean, first of all, in the example that you gave, absolute full admiration for the upfrontness and honesty of that. I was trying to think whether I had anyone, disclosing something similar to me throughout my career. I can't think, at least on the top of my head, anything to that. And yes, we have to become more educated, definitely. um and it's, that training is lacking. You are right, definitely. And this is something that we need, to talk more about. But we need to talk about, like I said, like you said, I really love the way you said, in a safe space, so that recruiter didn't know. Was the person's reaction the one that the person expected from what you're telling me? No. Does that make them a bad person? Not necessarily, and definitely not in the context that you gave me. So then it's also, if one makes that disclosure, say, look, tell me about the job. And I will tell you that whether in the context of the job if I am comfortable, and let's have an open discussion. So again, I think if we lead with that empathy, like you said, and with that safety mindset, we can have better conversations, definitely. And we learn more when we are in a safe environment than when we're put on the spot, admonished. It's the same with children. Okay, so with my daughter, when she does something wrong and I go to her, Susie, shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have said that, or whatever, she will block, and she's not going to learn from it. But if we work through it together, there are, better chances for it. It's not easy. Again, this is actually really hard to do. It requires a lot of patience, and it requires you leaving your ego aside and embracing the other person, and leaving the ego aside. It is, the human task at the end of the day, right? Philosophers and religious people, and we we try to break this down for centuries, and we haven't managed, and we will be a long time until we manage, if we ever do. But the closer we get to it, the better our lives can become. Like you said, the safer our environments can become.
In that regards, then, how can recruiters, whether internal or external, and how can employers during the recruitment process create safe environments where a candidate can be their true selves and embrace themselves, and the recruiters and hiring managers can have empathy?
Mhm. Well, I think the easiest step would be to have conversations like we're having now, talk about it, see what individuals are struggling with, see what companies are struggling with. This is what happened with mental health in the workplace, to make a well-known parallel. The more people talked about it, the less taboo it became, and the more awareness was created. So this is exactly the same. So the more we talk about it in an honest way with the intent to learn, the easier this will become. So when this conversation becomes easier and we have a more of a general awareness about it, that's when the building blocks start to happen. So again, using the parallel of mental health, a lot of companies started to provide mental health programs and training, whether that was in the form of therapy support or having their managers trained to recognize mental health challenges or discussions within the workplace. So the same goes for neurodiversity. Once we become more aware about, we can start putting the building blocks, training programs. Definitely, this requires professional help. You are not going to get this program from someone like myself. I'm not a trained professional in such subject. So my contribution as a recruiter is in, creating, like you said, a safe space, talking about it, welcoming, everyone, and having this honest conversation. And then when it comes to companies, is if you have the external professional help, you can start looking at your recruitment practices, at your advertising practices, like you've mentioned, at your interviewing practices, and at the environment within the workplace as well. So it is a process, and as long as there's willingness and openness towards it, we can start together building these blocks. And now that I think about it, as a recruiter, what can us recruiters do? So, when I correspond with individuals, initially, a lot of the times is via email. Okay. And I was actually thinking about, I do get emails, that are perhaps not written in what would expect to be the norm, whatever that is. But when I say the norm, I usually refer, to structure, sentence, and syntax. I always pick up the phone and have a conversation with the person, and we discuss and everything, and I'm, if it's for a job where writing is particularly important, that it has to be, particularly important, maybe it's because of presentations, board meetings, whatever it may be, I discuss with them. So, this job involves the rights of writing. I've noticed this. Can you walk me through it? Let's talk together, and things like that. So things like this do help. I had situations, when people blocked, now whether that is due to neurodiversity or nerves or anything, it does it really matter? They block. So, create that environment. Say, look, do you need a minute? You want us to go back? Let's unpack. And then help them. With you. I mean, yeah, it happens to me a lot of the times. That I lose my train of thought. It happens a lot more often than I would care to admit on a podcast, but it's true. It's just very true, or people who are stuttering, just be patient, offer them a glass of water, say, look, do you need 5 minutes? Do you want me to walk out? Give you 5 minutes with yourself. I mean, what how do you want us to, how can we make you, feel a bit better? These are manners though as well, aren't they?
They are. And you've hinted on a couple of things there in relationships to recruitment and neurodiversity. The first aspect is there's more than one way to ask the question. And if someone's having difficulty with the question, there's another way to rephrase it. The other aspect, you mentioned the stuttering aspect, in this regards, it comes down to not relation to stuttering, but in relation to the point I'm making, is that people need time to process the information. This is where working memory comes into play, where processing speed comes into play, which all relates to cognitive function and executive function. So because someone hasn't answered it, then it may not necessarily they're having difficulty with the question, but they need time to receive the question. They need time to be able to process the question, and then they need time to be able to respond to the question. So that requires recruiters to have that understanding and to give that space.
Yes, to process. But that goes, that goes for everyone, whether is within neurodiverse talent or neurotypical talent. So for example, in my process, the first conversation we have a general discussion, okay, then I follow up with the respective information about the client, the job, and everything. Then we have another discussion. I mean, I have at least 2 or 3 discussions with individuals on one job before they even go, to meet the client, if they decide to even get to that stage, because sometimes it might not be the case. They might think, look, thank you for everything, I don't think this is right for me, and that's fine. Give people time to process, and this goes whether you're dealing, with neurodiverse or neurotypical talent. Give them the time to process. I always tell them, I say, look, I don't like to put people on the spot. So if we debrief on this tomorrow, would that be okay? Or do you need more time? Some people will tell me, Fran, it's actually okay, even tonight, because I will have the time to go through it. Great. Others tell me, Fran, can you give me actually 2 or 3 days? Not a problem. You tell me what works for you, and we work together. If there is a time crunch and I'm making here, a parallel, you have to say, look, that's fine, but I'm looking to, the deadline on this is this one, just so you are aware. To make people aware, because sometimes you may not be in a position to give them that time, and that's fine, but make them aware, so then maybe you can find a common ground. And if there isn't a common ground, then we can all move on. It's again, it's fine. It doesn't need to go one way or the other.
We've been talking a lot about people and the user experience, because at the end of the day, it does come down to people and how they experience and navigate the job market or career working with a recruiter. So in that concept of people and their experience, this leads us into how employers or employees are seeing their relationship. In particular, now it's become even more prevalent since the pandemic and the Great Resignation. So on one hand, we have employers' point of view that this is a contractual relationship, which in certain extent it is. And the other hand, we have the viewpoint where from the other side, the employees who are recognizing that they want more than just a contract and being treated fairly. So my question is, how can candidates negotiate to be treated fairly that creates a safe environment in their favor?
How can candidates negotiate fairly? If we have to negotiate on common basic points, that's not a good start, is it? If we have to negotiate on, I'm sick, I can't come in, and you need to send a photo of your bowels hanging out. I'm exaggerating here to prove a point. That's not good. Okay. So there are certain characteristics that have to exist regardless. The first one is respect. Respect in all its forms, in the way that we communicate with each other, in time, in how we present things. Then there has to be a safe space, like you said. Now, a safe space also means a physical safe space and a mental safe space. A physical safe space, in terms of the ambience around you. I mean, in certain jobs, you can't, I don't know, do your job with music blasting in the background, because it will affect your focus. So depends on what that means. And then mental health safe space, that means to be able to address an issue when you're having it. Now, whether a lot of people make the mistake to think I have to be able to address my personal issues, that's one side of the coin. You also have to be able to address professional issues as well, such as, I'll give you an example. I am not good with this. I've tried my best. I don't get it. Can you help me? If you can't express that because you are afraid you're going to lose your job, or I don't know what have you, there's already a question mark there. Okay. And then vice versa on the employers, is to be aware of these things, because every boss has its boss. Okay. Now, with that in mind, think how you would want to be treated. Again, goes to empathy in their place. And ultimately, if nothing else, understand that by doing these things, your profits will increase. If nothing else. Okay. If we remove empathy, good relationships, having, an atmosphere where you feel valued. If those things don't matter, at least if only the bottom lines matter, because you mentioned contracts. So if only the bottom lines matter, then understand that will affect your bottom line. Okay, if we have to be very separatist in our thinking. So when employees, then how they can negotiate, again, on basic things, I think, it's they have to be there, and it's important to evaluate there. So rather than negotiate on things, I think it's important to have an open conversations about expectations, because we all have different expectations. Okay. And I will give you an example. The most common one we found nowadays is flexibility. And I actually posted something on LinkedIn this morning about it. Everyone talks about flexibility. Now, flexibility means different things for different people. Okay. What's flexible for me may not be for you, and vice versa. Okay. So it's important that, when we talk about, what's important for us, we define what that looks like. We can't just put a blanket play, and say, I want flexibility. What do you mean? How does flexibility look like for you? Because for some people, I have a lot of people who much more prefer to work in the office. They don't want to work from home. They don't like it. Okay, but for them, flexibility means that if the plumber comes in, they can be at home. Or if they want to beat the traffic and not, get stuck in a real bypass for 2 hours, they can come earlier or late. So flexibility means different things for different people. So then your job, if we are to use the word job, as a professional looking for work, is for you to identify your value points, your non-negotiables, and be able to articulate that, to have that honest conversation, and try not to fit everything under the general umbrella. So another example, during the interview process, to answer your question, people say, oh, I'm looking for a challenge. Most people would just move past that. Yeah, understandable. What does challenge mean to you? I mean, what are you looking to get out of the move? What do you want to change? And it's important that you're clear about those things, because the less clear you are, the greater the unknown will be, and the greater the chances are that you will walk into a place that does, I don't like to use the word good and bad, that does not align with what you're after. And the same goes for employers. Okay, these are the skill set that we need, and this goes back to the first part of the discussion. Lots of employers put a bullet point of communication skills. I mean, we talk or we write, okay, whether it's verbal communication or written communication or signal communication. In one way, we communicate. So, what does that mean? So, a lot of the times when we unpack that, it could be, for example, within executive level roles. Communication skills, usually what they mean by it is to be able to be diplomatic during very intensive discussions that can be emotionally charged. Now, that is a very crucial skill that not a lot of people have. So if people, when they read, they see that, they understand, yeah, no, I wouldn't be comfortable, contradicting myself with a room of 10 people. Nah, I'd rather skip that. So it's important to articulate what is and what isn't as well.
Those are some very great advice that you've given there and valid points. The overall theme that you have painted there is the employer needs to create certainty. And they have to create certainty by being specific and precise. And if they're not, then that's going to create uncertainty in the candidate. And at the same time, the candidate needs to be just as certain and specific and precise and clear with what they want. Otherwise, then not I don't think from an employer's perspective, because they won't find out until they get into the job, but from the candidate's perspective, it's going to create uncertainty in them and whether or not they can either prove their skills or achieve in getting what they're after based on what they've spelled out very clearly and precisely. Let's take a pause here because I want to share with you not one, but two workshops I've put together to bring awareness and to up-level the skills of employers, managers, and human resources. The first workshop aids in building a more inclusive environment in the workplace for neurodivergent talent and in developing the skills of management to be more engaging with their teams. I geared the second workshop towards examining and providing practical solutions and how to be more inclusive to neurodivergent talent in the recruitment process. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about these amazing programs.
As much as possible, yes. Yes. Full certainty will never exist because we do not live in a utopia. But if we get as close to it as possible, at least with a reasonable understanding and basis. And what do I mean by reasonable understanding and basis? So when we talk, again, going back to the example of flexibility, if my child is sick or, if I'm having a particular bad day, if I can take it off or be at home or something, you want that flexibility to be extended to you. But what happens when your employer is under fire and, something happens and it needs all hands on deck? Will you extend them the same flexibility that they've shown you? Will you work later? Will you come in earlier? So again, balance, yes? Balance on both ends. It has to be like that as much as possible. Again, certainty is very difficult to achieve. I know no one in the history of humankind who has achieved certainty. But clarity, that we can work with.
Now, I want to get into two questions here. It goes back, the second question will go back to the recruitment process. But let's take a look at the first question, which is an actual real life scenario that hasn't happened to anybody that I have coached, but I know of the story from the situation from a third party. And the recruiter has submitted a CV. The client has come back after doing their due diligence because they know somebody who worked at the company. They asked about that person, and they come back and say to the recruiter, is the person autistic? Without even mentioning that they already know that the person is autistic. And the recruiter says, yes, they are. And he says, okay, we don't want that person. And that goes back to the whole scenario of whether or not the recruitment process is safe. I mean, first off, if a person is leaving one employer and someone has disrespected and taken away that person's right to choose to disclose or not to disclose. They've taken that power away from them by indicating that this person is, this former co-worker is autistic. And then it also paints the picture of that the current client is not creating a safe environment at all and telling the recruiter take them off the list. So from that scenario, from your experience and from what we've talked about so far, what's in that kind of situation, what is the ideal situation? How could it have been handled differently?
A, I can't believe this happened, what you're saying. B, never came across it in my career to date, never. So to give an answer based on experience is impossible because I never encountered such.
Fair enough. So from your professional
But from my,
standpoint,
exactly, if I was to think it through, I mean, number one, the instinct I have, the first instinct I have is that that should have never been disclosed because that is a condition that is at the discretion of the employee himself or herself, whether to disclose it or not. Okay, so if someone, like you said, takes away that choice, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not even in line with the law. I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not an employment lawyer, so I can't make that comment, but it doesn't sound right to me. So how could that situation be better? Again, if someone provides a reference about another person, is to understand the detail into and the scope of the disclosure that reference would go into. So this comes to professional preparation, which is why you will find, for example, within a lot of firms that usually the standard references are standard, job title, dates, duties and responsibilities, and that's it, and that's fine because it's standard. A person's previous performance in a job is not an indicator of how they will perform in the next one. This is something that we really need to get on board with, because there are a lot of factors that come to play in performance within a company. Okay, so that's what I would think of. I mean, is to understand the scope of the reference and then not make certain comments. And then for the client, they said, I don't want them. Who said to the recruiter, I don't want them because they're autistic. I mean, my first question would be why. Well, that's the first thing I would ask, because I would be generally be curious to understand why is it, and have you assessed to what level the autism exists? I mean, there are different levels, different types. I mean, I am to some extent within that boat as well, to some extent. So then it depends. Again, create a discussion, but my basic instinct, as I said, is that shouldn't have happened, but it happened. So how do we deal with it? Create a discussion. If you find yourself in that situation, ask why. Okay, to what extent this would affect, why are you apprehensive? I don't know if I've answered it or,
no, you
or
have,
not.
you have. I mean,
This is the instinct answer I'm giving you. Like I said,
yeah.
I never came across this situation, so I don't have a practical experience to give. This is me thinking my way through it
No,
on the spot.
I totally understand that, Fran, and I respect that. It's just I'm giving you a real world
Real world, yeah,
experience,
yeah.
of a real scenario that has happened. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you as a guest, is to get that professional perspective on how things should have been done, how things can be different, and what's the reality of the situation in the job market when it comes to dealing with these kind of situations.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one. And but it's a question and it's a scenario that needs to be brought up and it needs to be asked
Yeah.
to challenge the status quo.
And to educate as well. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And that leads into the second question, because the reality is is that the employers are the gatekeepers, and because of the gatekeepers, they create the jobs, they set the standards, and
Yes.
because they're setting the standards, that forces third parties like yourself or even job posting sites to follow those standards. And as a result of that, then it makes a difficult. Well, the reality is that because of that, there's no accountability in these kinds of situation when it comes to recruiters or job adverts. And then at the same time, there's no accountability within the company in regards to making sure that there's inclusivity and diversity for hiring all types of talent, but in this case, neurodivergent talent. So, and even if a recruiter or a third-party job advert takes the initiative to try to move the needle in a different direction that becomes more inclusive, they still have to abide by and adapt to what the gatekeepers want. So in that scenario, how can we create a more inclusivity, and how can we hold all parties to be more accountable to be inclusive and diverse to neurodiverse talent?
Again, not something that I would have direct experience in. I sound very lucky now, don't I? um, so, but I did see adverts that there was one particular one which I found, I'm laughing, I shouldn't be laughing, I'm laughing sarcastically more than anything. It was a job that involved dealing with the public. So naturally, when you are in a job dealing with the public, presentation is part of the job, but one of the things that the advert was saying is that you have to have a beautiful appearance, and I was like, okay, so what's beautiful? And I found it. It's really bad, first of all, to put something like that. It's very silly. This was very little intelligence, and it's how do we change that? Well, if I would have a client that would tell me, to put in the ad something like beautiful or something, I would say, listen, no, because of these reasons. And again, it's about having an honest conversation about it and educating wherever possible. And when it's not possible, you always have the option to walk away from things. So that's one thing. So how can we create those jobs to be more inclusive? Again, like I said, by education, educating ourselves as much as possible and trying to make a conscious effort. Again, mistakes will happen. This is very important, I think, for everyone who's listening to this to understand no one is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so it's important we bear that in mind. And when we find something and we would like to address it, for valid reasons, call that person, call that company, have a discussion with them, with the intent to create consensus, to educate, to have that good discussion wherever possible. I'm not saying go on a crusade online and start emailing company. I mean, that would be a waste of everyone's time, but in the appropriate context and situation, try and lead with an open mind and try to understand and think about it first. Think about it first. I think if we give ourselves time to think about things, we will make different choices as well. But again, I'm yet to see, other than that isolated case, and that's why it stuck out to me, because it's not something that I would have seen very often online. I thought it was quite, it shows very little intelligence in the most basic form.
Well, it goes back to the United States, Abercrombie and Finch, and what they were doing in regards to their recruitment practices and the look and feel that they wanted to have for their stores. And one of the things was that, it had to be, I think can't remember if they advertised it or definitely they trained the managers in the sense that they want only good-looking people, and particularly white, blonde, and good-looking.
Right.
And there's a whole documentary about that, but
So we can't
the
work there, Joseph, then you and I,
no,
yeah.
no, apparently not. Well, you might have better luck than I do, but no, but
Mm.
apparently not. So moving on, then. I mean, well, actually, before moving on, you mentioned in regards to job advert, but what about the recruiters?
Mhm.
What can the recruiters do to be more inclusive and to try to move that needle in that
Mhm.
direction?
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, yes. I think what us as external recruitment parties can do is again, broaden our understanding of the challenges that are being faced by different job seekers at different stages throughout their careers, or employers and at different stages in their recruitment cycle. So the broader our understanding becomes, the less of our bias will be present, hopefully, if we work through it. If not, it's still going to be there. Um, and try again, to look. I always revise my processes, for example, and the way I do things. And sometimes I look back at things that I do and I was like, oh God, what on earth were you even thinking with that? But that's how we learn. We do the best that we can with the information we've got at the time in our hands. Now, the world evolves and our understanding evolves, and there's nothing wrong to go back, and look at it and, try and make it better. That doesn't make you a hypocrite, because a lot of people say, oh, but you used to say that and now you're saying this. That doesn't make you a hypocrite. We're not talking here about, the death penalty discussions and things like that. We're talking about, making good improvements in our behavior, in the way of approaching things. So, it's by creating that understanding. And it's also to have the ability to say no to certain things that are obviously wrong. Okay. So again, maybe it's the sector I work in. I don't know. Maybe it's that I'm lucky. I don't know, but I can't think, of particularly, bad situations, other than one in particular, when during a client meeting, they told me that, we are looking specifically for a woman. And I said, okay, why? Because I was looking to understand, why is that important. Sometimes there are valid reasons, other times no. So I was looking to understand why. And the answer was like, I mean, I don't know how they feel comfortable telling me that, considering I'm a woman. It's like, well, Fran, women are less intelligent, so, and I don't want anyone challenging me. Now, that would have gone down two ways. Me being from Eastern Europe, it would have done the Eastern European way, not appropriate in a professional setting, naturally. And the second way was just, I thought for a brief second, is there an opportunity here for a discussion? No. I immediately made the decision that no. Because sometimes you have that, that gut feeling, you're flogging a dead horse. And I said, listen, if that works for you, I wish you the best of luck. It's not something that aligns with a few things, and I don't think we're right for each other. And that was the end of it. No hard feeling, nothing. I don't know what they've done and what have you. Never looked back. Don't really care, to be honest with you. And if we have the option, to walk away from certain things, take it. Yeah, we don't have to say yes to everything in all circumstances. And there will be opportunities to have a conversation, and an understanding, and change the opinion of the person. Other times that opportunity will not be there, and just learn how to focus your time where it matters.
Yeah, that's first off, what a very sexist thing to
Oh, I mean,
say.
very brave of the person to say that, but there we go.
There we go. It's very brave and very sexist, and very outlandish.
And brave, I don't mean that in a good way. I just, to point it out,
Well,
not in a
brave.
positive.
There is a sense of bravery to have the nerve to say that and
Yeah,
actually mean it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, you're right in the sense. Is there an opportunity to have a discussion about that? And I think because my follow-up question would have been, is that how can recruiters try to hold employers accountable? And you've answered that by saying, can we have a discussion about that? And if you can, walk away, because it's not, because there needs to be some sort of line drawn on ensuring that there's some sort of accountability, that every
Mm,
party is trying to be inclusive as possible.
as much as possible and to do their best. So that for me, at least in my experience today, that is achieved through open discussion, conversation. And if we're both on the same page, great. If not, again, to walk away. That's kind of where, from an accountability point of view, we can look at things,
Mhm,
I
mhm.
would say, as much as possible. Our knowledge will evolve over time as well, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, over time, hopefully sooner than
Yes.
later.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
the so this now comes into play, going back to the recruitment aspect and negotiating. You mentioned for example, the non-negotiables. So one of the biggest challenges that neurodivergent talent has is having the need for particular accommodations depending on the scenario and the
Hmm.
situation, and
Hmm.
their individual neurodiversities. Um,
Hmm.
so in the recruitment process, with or without disclosing, is it possible for a candidate to be able to negotiate in having an accommodation? Hey, listeners, I want to share with you not one, but two workshops that I've put together to bring awareness and to up-level the skills of employers and managers in human resources. The first workshop aids in building more inclusive environments in the workplace for neurodivergent talent and in developing the skills of management to be more engaging with their teams. I geared the second workshop towards examining and providing practical solutions and how to be more inclusive to neurodivergent talent in the recruitment process. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about this amazing program.
I mean, to be possible, yes, definitely. I see no reason why that would not be the case. So then again, it goes back to understanding what those particular accommodations would be what form they would take, and to discuss those as well. You know, um, so um, physical accommodations, for example, can the employer provide that? If they cannot, tell them that, say, look, we are not in a position to provide this. It could be that the cost would be too high and they cannot afford it as a business. They simply don't have the money. That doesn't make them non-inclusive. That, they simply do not have the financial means at their disposal to accommodate that. But it's good for the person to know, you know. So here it depends, on what we're talking about. But I see absolutely no reason why one would not, express what accommodations that they would require in order to be effective and comfortable within their job, and an employer to make those accommodation whatever, sorry, it's within their remit to accommodate those as well. For me, in the simplest form I have come across is with regards to working parents. So they need to pick up their child at a certain time, be at home at a certain time, and be there. Now, that is a form of accommodation. It is a physical accommodation in terms of the time available. So, I tell them, listen, do you need particular, accommodations to, for flexibility or whatever it is, depending on what the discussion is? Then I discussed that with my client. Again, very rarely I had the situation where it was physically impossible for the client to accommodate those for very valid reasons. It could be the case that they had to be, physically there to check certain, security aspects that did require physical presence there, So again, I see no reason why that conversation cannot be had.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I asked, because, there's always that hesitation to ask, especially if there's the fear of being found out and you are masking one's neurodiversity. I mean, you mentioned cost. Now, cost wise, again, every business is different. I understand that. I respect that. And with that said, though, the average cost for accommodations from a neurodiverse perspective can be anywhere from 0 to 1,000 euros per individual. And it could vary. So, so in a negotiation, I could, for myself, ask for having Grammarly being provided. Now, Grammarly is what, for a yearly subscription for a business would be maybe 300 euros a year. So that's, again, depending on the size of the business, that is a drop in the bucket.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Depending on the scope, and that's why I said, again, I don't have visibility of all types of requests that could be possible. That's why, I mentioned the financial factor, because if it's something of particularly sizable, then that could be problematic. And what I wanted to point out with that example is it's not because people don't want to be inclusive. It's maybe they can't afford it, if it's something sizable. That's why I said, a discussion, of what is necessary and how we can work with it is again, I see absolutely no reason why anyone with a decent behavior and perspective would say no to this if they have the opportunity to do it. I can't think of any reason why not.
Absolutely. That's good to hear from your side of this table, what can be done and how you would work with talent to be able to ask and negotiate that and be the third party to be able to explain that to a client on behalf of the candidate. So we've covered quite a lot in this discussion. And you have really hit it on along the way, particular strategies and a way of approaching things. So what advice as a recruiter and with your experience working with candidates, what advice and skills can you share to assist candidates in preparing for the job market and working with a recruiter, starting off with CV, interviewing, negotiations, etc.?
Got it. So the first thing that I would recommend, and it's something that I wrote about it in my newsletter, is before you embark on a job search, now whether you go through a recruiter or you apply to jobs directly or you're networking in your own professional network or acquaintance network, before you even start to write your CV and see where you're going to send it, take a step back and look at your current situation that you're in. And think about 3 positives and 3 negatives. I always give the example of 3 because 3 is not too little, not too much. Okay, so you don't get lost in the little things, like the coffee is great. Sure, we're not going to put that in the first 3 points, right? Unless coffee is an absolutely essential thing for you to have. So put in balance, 3 good things about where you are at the moment professionally and 3 good things that are not good. Now, understand the 3 things that are not good and try to understand the reasons. Okay? Is it you? Is it the company? Is it the market? Is it the circumstances? Is it I don't know, whatever it is. Ask yourself, what chances do I have to improve these 3 negatives? Okay? And if I was to improve these negatives, what steps would I need to take? And if these steps were achieved and these negatives were improved, imagine, close your eyes for a minute and imagine everything is hunky-dory. Would I be happy in this place right now? You have your answer, okay? You'll know if you can work through challenges with your current employer or whether even if you work through those challenges, you still don't feel you're in the right place. So then you understand. So whatever decision you take, then it will help you then when you evaluate opportunities to evaluate them on the basis of the things that you want to improve. Because if you do not know the things you want to improve, you're going to repeat the same thing over and over again. Okay, in some way or form, maybe not as expensive, but there will still be elements of that. Trust me, it cost me 20 years to learn this. Yes. And it's not something that I know because I'm very wise. I'm far from it. It's because I've made these mistakes. And I've seen people doing these mistakes, but mainly because I've made these mistakes, okay? And I know don't make the same mistake once or twice. I make it 3-4 times just to be sure that it's a mistake, okay? So save yourself the grief and go through this exercise with you. Then when it comes to the CV, because when you understand those things, then CV writing becomes easier. The language that you use in your CV, we're talking about language used in adverts. There's a language used in CVs as well. Should we judge on that? No, again, have a discussion, and open it up, put your CV together, and, when you apply for jobs and stuff, I know it's hard because there is still a lot of advertising there that is confusing, like you said, that is, too long. And I also know from personal experience that when you are forced to look for a job, you will apply left, right, and center. And we need to bear this in mind as well. And that's fine. Okay. But if you can be intentional about that search, when you apply for jobs, apply for jobs that, A, interest you, and B, you have the capabilities for it as well. Now, when I say you have the capabilities for it, there are different levels of capabilities. I'm not saying sit there and read the job and then pontificate at what level you are and everything, because it's impossible to see that from a job advert, okay? But what I mean by it is at least, the basic minimum. So for example, if you see a job advert that, requires, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, I don't know. You need to know how to do, you need to have demonstrable practical experience with preparing files for audit, and you've never been involved in that. Find something that is more in line, because if that is particularly specified there as an essential, you need to have that ability. If you don't have that ability, you're better off than focusing yourself on jobs where you have the ability or you can grow your ability into, okay? So use your energy in the right places. If you're not sure, still apply, but in your application or something, or you can write an email, say, look, I've seen this, I'm not entirely sure, if it would be the right fit. This is what my understanding is. Is it possible to have a discussion or something like that? See whatever is appropriate for the circumstances. Then during the interview process, again, building up on what we've done to date, look to understand the business. A lot of people make the mistakes that when they go to interviews, they don't ask appropriate questions. And what do I mean by appropriate questions? Most people ask, so what will my day-to-day look like? Okay, that is a good question. What does a day look like? Most people will answer, okay, you come in, you do this, that, and the other. It's a very, simplistic view of how a day would look like. What you want to know is, where are the bottlenecks, for example? Okay, because a lot of people that I speak with, for example, think, oh, Fran, I took the job and then, I realized that we were behind, with 3 years on certain stuff. I didn't know that. Did you ask? Where are we with things? Well, no, because I assumed. You see? So if we become a bit more critical, again, we will still make mistakes, don't get me wrong, but try to understand the level of certainty that the person can give you, so what are the bottlenecks? What are the challenges? People say we give training. Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's very good to hear. Almost never anyone asks me, how does the training look like? What does the training involve? Okay, so try to get that understanding, so because it will help you in making your decision as well, and understand what is of value to you. If you are looking to increase your financial package solely, and that is your sole motivator, just focus on, there's nothing wrong with it. If your then value is to find, a greater level of flexibility that works within the circumstances that you have, go for it. So identify what works for you and then strive for balance, because it's unlikely we will have all into one.
Very, very good advice. So definitely starting off the first one. And it's interesting, the asking in-depth questions from the candidate perspective, I completely agree with you. But it's funny enough that from experience and from the people I coach, that the interviewers don't ask the in-depth questions in regards to their skill set and their
Oh,
capability in the jobs. They don't go
yes,
deep
yes,
enough. I mean,
yes, yes, yes.
so you mentioned, the training. Okay, you're right. We give training. You kind of accept that on face value. But
Mhm.
if you actually dig deeper as, oh, how is the training done? What does the training look like? It gives an indication of actually, whether or not they're actually going to properly train you or not.
Mhm. Or whether their training method works with you as well. I think that's very
Mm, mm.
important. Okay. So a lot of the training is on the job. Okay. And so for people it works, for others it doesn't. Other training is formal. So, we need to understand, like you said, you were talking about natural learning ability, I think you said, right?
Natural learner. Yes.
And natural learner, right? So we all learn at different paces in different at different complexities levels. Okay. And it's the same with training. We all absorb information in a different way. Now, for example, in my case, if you give me online training, okay, so you send me online PDFs and stuff, I need to print them. I need to color code the things. I need to underline them. And after I spend a couple of hours do that, you know what I will do, Joseph? I will write them again myself by hand because I need to do it in my own handwriting. Otherwise, for me, it doesn't make sense. Okay. But if I do not have the time and space to do that, I'm going to struggle. You expect me to read off a PDF, my mind will go into la la land and you will never see Fran again. Okay. So this is an example. And you are completely right. But I didn't cover the interview asked by employers because you asked me from the candidate perspective. But the same goes for employees. We need to ask better questions. So I'll give you an example. In I work a lot within the regulated sector, and within that sector, especially when it comes to analysis, whether it's financial analysis, investment analysis or whatever it may be, or accounting or operating, to some extent, all of these disciplines will use Excel to a varying degree. Okay. So I would ask people, how are you, with Excel, to what extent you're using it, and, the general, yeah, I'm good in Excel. I said, would you mind, exploring that with me a bit further? Because, for example, in this role, you would work with a particular model, so for example, doing cash flow forecasting in Excel, it's there are better things that you could do than that, put it this way, right? It's not the easiest thing to do. So when someone tells you they're good at Excel, but you need them to do cash forecasting in Excel and they've never done it before, where does that leave us? Right? So we need to understand, again, to a certain degree of certainty, the abilities that will be necessary in that. So, and look, again, from experience, it's not easy to put this in a job spec. You can't put everything on a job ad, and some things are going to be missed, which is why when you get to the conversation stage, it's important to become, more refined in the discussion and so on and so forth.
And what about, it's not a new, well, I don't know, it's not really a new phenomenon, but it's definitely become more of a pop cultural thing. I wouldn't say pop cultural, but that's the only word I can come to mind at the moment. In regards to the whole concept of storytelling and being
Mhm.
storytelling in your CV, storytelling in during the interview when you're speaking to the hiring manager. What advice can you give in regards to storytelling?
So for me, the easiest advice that I give to people with that is to summarize it. Okay. Because when you're put on the spot, to answer a question, it's very difficult when you rummage through your own mind trying to pick up information, from different corners of your brain, as it is for me, at least. So the advice that I give is to summarize. So what was the situation that you've dealt with? What was your involvement in it? And what was the outcome of it? So very simply. Okay, so someone asks you, okay, how are your Excel skills? Okay. So in my current role or previous or academic or whatever, in whatever context, I used Excel in this. I have worked with these formulas, pivot table, etc. And I'm very comfortable in achieving these sorts of results. In the context of the role that we're discussing today, Joseph, when you say, how, I've explained to you, at what level I see and gave you an example of my Excel skills, but would you be able to walk me through exactly what you mean by in the context of this role in terms of Excel usage and how it's going to play into my responsibilities?
Okay.
Now it's the interviewer's time to story tell you that, right?
Absolutely.
So it's very important during the interview process to treat it as a conversation, because again, a lot of individuals, whether they are interviewers or interviewees, they make this mistake. You answer the question and then you stop.
Very good. Now, I want to go back to your first bit of advice in regards to looking at your pros and your negatives.
Yes.
Now, that's very sound advice if someone is employed.
Mm-hmm.
But what about someone who's unemployed? So if we take
Yes,
a look
yes.
at statistically, say ADHDers are 60% most
Yes.
likely to be unemployed, or dyslexics are 5 times more likely to be unemployed.
Yes.
What advice can you give in that regards?
Yes. Well, I have been unemployed, and it's very hard. It's very challenging mentally, financially, physically, at all angles. So the best advice that I can give you, if you find yourself in that situation, whether neurodivergent or neurotypical, is to ground yourself, number one, and look at your skill set and focus on your skill set, okay? And articulate that and, plan yourself to the outside world, okay? If you ground yourself into the negative, which is, I don't have a job, I'm not getting replies to job applications, I'm not going through interview stages, you're going to dig yourself in a hole that is going to be very difficult for you to sustain mentally. Rejections are going to happen. Opportunities will be missed, regardless of whether you dig yourself into a hole or not. Okay? So don't put yourself into a hole, because the world around you will happen anyway. It's very important. And what happens around you most of the time has very little to do with what you're doing, very little, if any. Okay? The rejection is not a reflection of you. It could be very well that, I don't know, someone else worked for one of their competitors and they went with that. I mean, for all you know, it could be 1,000 reasons that have nothing to do with your skill set. So ground yourself in what you're good at and focus on those. People will tell you, work on your weaknesses. Bullshit. Sorry, I didn't know if I'm supposed to.
You can swear all you want.
Okay, thanks. Bullshit. Focus on what you're good at and grow that. And once you've grown that and made it work for you and in your favor, see what weaknesses we can work with. And I'll give you an example. I am very, very good at logic by all intents and purposes and standards of tests and what I've done. Now, most people will think because I'm very good with logic, I'm also very good at maths. Wrong, right? Maths makes me cry repeatedly. And when I see maths, I'm like, oh Lord. So when I was at university, believe it or not, I started to study economics. Okay, everyone around me told me, Fran, you're shit at maths. Yes, but I didn't see economics as maths. I saw it very logical, and I saw it as a relationship between people. And yes, there is the maths element to it, but not to the extent that most people think. So if I was to focus on my weaknesses, I would have never followed that through. If I was to focus on my weaknesses, I moved to London. I left Romania when I was 18. I ended up with London. My mom took a bank loan of 50 pounds. It doesn't sound like a lot. It was, in the local currency and at the time. And that's all the money that I got to in London. Actually, I didn't go with 50. I ended up with 15 because in Belgium, I bought a toy pig because it was really cute. And I thought, I might as well have it. But if I was to focus on my weaknesses, the fact that, who's going to speak, to someone who, is a little bit awkward, comes from incredibly small town that you'll have to zoom in 10 times on Google Maps to find it, right? In Romania, in central London, going to interviews in Mayfair. Okay. So you have to focus on your strengths and do not be a victim of your circumstances. And I can't stress this enough. And I'm writing an article about it as well. We somehow got into a habit of pointing fingers and becoming victims of our circumstances. It's very important to understand that no one owes you nothing. It's down to you. So you need to believe in yourself and you need to be strong in yourself and confident and make your way through life, because no one is coming to save you.
Well, this has definitely been a very wonderful conversation. And truth be told, the conversation will continue on your podcast. So can you tell us about your podcast?
Yes, definitely. And thank you for that. Joseph, first of all, I would like to thank you and your listeners for the opportunity to have this discussion. I have certainly learned a lot. And it has been eye-opening. So I'm sincerely grateful for this discussion. And if there is one thing I could leave the listeners with is, like I said, believe in yourself, focus on your strength, and let's support each other rather than point fingers and look for holes. I think that's important. Now, with regards to my I don't know if we can call it a channel. I do some live podcasts through YouTube and LinkedIn. So I'm not very structured with those things. But what we're going to talk about when we will have our conversation in February, I would very much like to learn from you more about how we can create, as someone who has experience in working with neurodiverse talent, into how we can create more inclusive practices, but how can we also become more aware about the strengths that neurodiverse talent brings to our lives and businesses alike.
Fantastic. And what's the name of your podcast?
It's just because yours has a very good name. Mine is just FM Search Talks with Fran.
It's
Very simple, very basic. Okay. It's Fran. Hi. Even FM Search. It wasn't very creative, was it? But there we go.
it's your name, it's your branding, so that's perfect. And then other than your podcast, how can everybody reach you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. If you type in Fran Moisa, you'll find me there. Follow me, with FM Search on LinkedIn, or you can visit the website, which is fmsearch.eu. And there are all my contact details that you can reach out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Fran, for being an amazing guest and for sharing your thoughts and experience with today's job market. I also want to thank you, my continued listeners, for your amazing support of this podcast. I also encourage you to continue to support this podcast so I can bring you more amazing content. You can do so by visiting my Patreon page, where you can connect with me more directly with several options. Till next time, take a leap and transform.